Welcome back to Outside Views, and today we're tackling a question that is quite frankly a polite way of asking, is it possible to put the pieces of the smashed economic vase back together? And the topic is ideas to make Brexit work. My personal view is that we need to stop pretending there is a simple and pain-free policy that can magically unlock a growth bonanza and instead face the reality that making Brexit work means fundamentally undoing the economic damage it has caused. And first, let's establish the starting point because the numbers are catastrophic and getting worse. The new research from economists like Nicholas Bloom and his colleagues has reignited the debate for a devastating reason, because they estimate that Brexit has reduced the size of the UK economy by a whopping 6 to 8%, and I'm not doing that again, compared to the path it would have been on the, you don't want to hear it, but had the UK remained in the EU. And this figure is double the original 4% hit projected by the official government forecasters, you remember the OBR. And this evidence is corroborated by multiple methods, comparing the UK's trajectory to a synthetic counterfactual made of other advanced economies and by peering directly into firm-level data, comparing businesses highly exposed to the EU with those less exposed. And the conclusion is inescapable. The UK is structurally poorer because of Brexit. And we're talking about a permanent crushing tax on the entire economy. And this economic reality is why the political debate is shifting. When you have a government that wants to focus purely on domestic growth, on improving skills, building infrastructure, and reforming planning laws, they are forced to confront the fact that these measures, while necessary, are simply not big enough to fill a 6 to 8% hole. And as economist John Springford argues, the domestic reform required to generate that level of growth would have to be extremely radical and arguably more politically difficult than reopening the Brexit deal itself. And I don't mean renegotiating the TCA, that won't happen. You would need a massive, intrusive shift of resources from consumption to investment, a planning regime that steamrolls local objections, and competition policies that force businesses and citizens to work harder and invest more. And that is a politically brutal program, and there is no guarantee it would even work in a medium-sized open economy like the UK's, which is utterly dependent on trade, migration, and international investment. Unlike the United States, with its massive internal market and vast natural resources, the UK simply cannot rely solely on internal mechanisms to generate prosperity. So, if domestic fixes are insufficient, what are the real ideas to make Brexit work, which to me means recovering a decent chunk of those catastrophic losses? All credible solutions require the UK to jettison the so-called red lines that defined the Brexit project in the first place. The more red lines that are dropped, the larger the potential economic gains. And the most timid but most politically talked about idea is, as you already know, a customs union. And so, make Brexit work in the end just means reduce the damage. Even if Farage and consorts and a lot of those delulu Brexiteers in the comments are still talking about WTO Brexit, we didn't get the real Brexit we wanted. Make Brexit work doesn't exist, even if Starmer has put out such a bullcrap himself. But let's stick to the customs union idea for a second again. The political pressure for this is now intense, with more than 100 MPs voting to debate the idea, including a dozen of the current governing party's backbenchers. A customs union would eliminate complex rules of origin requirements, which currently act as a massive administrative cost, sometimes adding 2 to 8% to the price of goods. It would certainly help, perhaps reducing the cost of Brexit by around 1 percentage point of GDP, according to all government estimates. And let's even take the very ambitious ones from the Lib Dems with 2.2. This is just a span we are talking about. It still would leave a 5 to 7% gap. It's a sticking plaster on a gaping wound. The reason the customs union is insufficient is that the single largest cost of Brexit came not from leaving the customs union, but from leaving the single market. Leaving the single market is what created the regulatory friction, the divergence, and the barriers to services, the sector where the UK is strongest. And services are barely included in the TCA. And what people still tend to forget, on services, there are still transitional periods running. Brexit has not even fully happened for services. And therefore, the only true way to make Brexit work is to achieve some form of single market participation. And you know where that goes. But this is where the debate has to get brutally honest about the trade-offs, because the EU has always been crystal clear. Single market access requires adherence to its 4 freedoms. And we are seeing the EU bend this principle for specific sectors. They are opening to discussing single market participation in agri-food and energy. But this comes with a massive sovereign cost. The UK would have to formally align with EU rules in those areas and commit to continuously updating its laws as the EU rulebook changes. The UK becomes a rule taker in vast swaths of its economy just to smooth trade in those sectors. And the most realistic and most economically beneficial path to a workable Brexit is the one that most committed partisans on both sides would hate. A new deal founded on the free movement of goods, energy, and people. And this effectively would be a Swiss-style model, which, I have to be honest, the EU does not want, would be a deep participation in the single market via bilateral agreements achieved by accepting the full 4 freedoms. And it might sound as a sensible way forward, because the UK is not going to fundamentally regulate differently from the EU anyway. And the EU is the UK's largest goods export market by far, and the British regulatory preferences on environmental and consumer safety standards were virtually identical to Europe's. They diverged, but not that much that they couldn't take that back. Becoming a rule taker in goods in exchange for frictionless trade would be an act of pragmatism. And in energy, aligning on energy rules, that's essential for security, for price stability, and hitting climate targets. Isolation here is simply dangerous. And about the free movement of people, as many people don't want that, this is the political red line that must be sacrificed for the economic health of the nation. The benefits are higher output and tax revenues, addressing the labor shortages that plague key sectors like health, and creating opportunities for Britons to work abroad. And crucially, the economic scaremongering about a massive influx is misplaced. Flows of people have already slowed dramatically as wages in Central and Eastern Europe have converged with Western Europe. And furthermore, any future accessions like Ukraine would likely come with transitional controls on free movement, so the dramatic 2004-style rise is simply not on the horizon. We had that for later memberships. And the benefits of accepting free movement outweigh the political gain of dropping the red line, because the largest cost of Brexit came from the loss of openness to trade and migration. Goods trade openness is now a tenth lower than it was in 2016, whereas it is stable in peer European economies. And this loss hurts UK manufacturing, which is the key source of exports and well-paid jobs in the country's smaller cities and towns. The slow death of these productive international industries constrains local spending and hurts smaller businesses everywhere. And ultimately, the choice facing the UK government is stark and has not changed since 2016. A trade policy that substantially raises output and productivity, or an independent border policy that preserves the red lines. You cannot have both. And the current strategy, the Brexit reset, which seeks to nibble away at barriers in small areas, is projected to raise GDP by a paltry 0.3 to 0.7% over a decade. This is an insultingly small gain compared to the 6 to 8% hole that needs filling. The New Deal they would need, full single market access for goods, energy and people, is the only way to recover the bulk of the economic losses. And let's be honest, to achieve that, there's only one way, only a third of the British want to talk about. But the question is not one of economics, but one of political courage. Can the current government party or any future government, not the one predicted at the moment definitely, except that making Brexit work means walking back the foundational destructive political choices of the past. I believe the economic gravity will force their hand at some point, but until they accept the inevitable trade-offs, the British economy will continue its slow and painful decline.